Anna Monroe was 27 years old and had a heart that no one could measure on any scale. She wasn't the most experienced nurse at Westbridge, nor the quickest on the night shifts, but she was the one who stayed late when a patient cried from fear or loneliness. That particular autumn, her days all felt the same. Fresh sheets, medications administered, diagnoses discussed with hurried doctors. She lived alone in a small apartment 20 minutes from the hospital and almost always ate a cold lunchbox on some countertop. She listened to classical music through her headphones as she walked the corridors, as if the gentle notes could filter the weight of all the suffering that passed through there. She didn't expect to be summoned by the administration. When they called her name at that Wednesday's meeting, she thought it was because of some error in the charts. But it wasn't that. Anna had been chosen to care for Grant Carter. Before continuing, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss any of the stories we share here. There's a lot of powerful stuff coming. Grant Carter wasn't just any patient. He was the patient. A name that filled 3 entire floors of protocols that made interns break out in a cold sweat just pronouncing it. He'd been in a coma for exactly 364 days, isolated in a hospital suite more equipped than many luxury apartments. The car accident that left him in that state was still shrouded in rumors. They spoke of a chase, of sabotage, even of a suicide attempt. No one knew for sure. What they did know was that Grant, above all, was a titan in business. Arrogant, ruthless, rich enough to buy the world's silence. But there, lying among machines, he was just a thin, motionless body with a surprisingly youthful face. Anna heard everything they had to say. She heard the warnings, the recommendations, the tone of fear, and yet she said yes. Not for fame, nor for money. She said yes because she saw humanity where everyone else saw only a name. The first day was silent. Anna entered the room at 7 in the morning, wearing the white coat that already smelled of disinfectant and lavender. Grant's suite was cold, lit by large windows and by a heart monitor that pulsed at a steady rhythm. He lay on his side, blonde hair slightly tousled, as if he had just drifted off. His face was serene, but expressionless. There were no traces of pain nor of peace. Only absence. Anna approached carefully, checked his vital signs, and then began to speak. She didn't use formulaic phrases, nor did she try to sound overly professional. She simply told him what she had had for breakfast, that her cat had been sneaking over to the neighbor's house, and that the hospital elevator had jammed again. She spoke as if he could hear her, as if it were natural, because, to her, it was. In an environment where many treated unconscious patients like objects, Anna refused to believe that silence meant giving up. In the days that followed, she established a routine with Grant. She turned on the aroma diffuser, played soft music at the lowest volume, and draped a light blanket over him, even when the air conditioning wasn't that cold. She shared details of her own life. She talked about her brother who lived far away, about her childhood in a small inland town, about an old ache she carried in her chest, but never fully explained. Sometimes she brought books and read aloud. Other times, she simply sat beside the bed, watching the monitor's beats. Nothing seemed to happen, but she stayed, always. And it was in that staying that the silent magic hid itself. Anna believed, with an almost childlike faith, that some part of him was still there, waiting, listening, fighting. There was one morning in particular that Anna would never forget. It was a Friday, and the city was still waking under a fine, constant rain. She arrived earlier that day, carrying a mug of chamomile tea and a red-covered book she'd bought at a second-hand shop. Upon entering the room, she sensed a different kind of silence. It was no longer the usual emptiness. There was something in the air, like an almost imperceptible shift. When she moved in to adjust the feeding tube and check the heart rate, she felt for just an instant Grant's hand exert a slight pressure on hers. It was minimal, almost nothing, but it was real. The shock made her breath catch. She looked directly at his face, searching for any sign, a twitch, a response. Nothing, just the same stillness as always. She could have doubted herself, could have thought it was her imagination. But she didn't. She knew what she'd felt. In the days that followed, the signs repeated themselves, discreet and spaced out, like whispers from a distant place. A trembling finger, an eyelid that seemed about to flutter, a breath that wavered off-pattern. Anna began recording everything in a notebook she kept hidden in the inner pocket of her coat. She told no one on the team, at least not yet. She was afraid of seeming too anxious or of fostering false hope, but deep down, she knew it was real. She wasn't a naive nurse. She had seen death up close, buried friends, and cried behind the locker room door more than once. But she also knew how to recognize when life was trying to come back. And there, as unlikely as it seemed, she felt it. Grant Carter was trying to wake up. If this part already moved you, click the like button. It really helps get these stories out to more people who need something real today. The awakening did not happen in a cinematic way. There were no eyes snapping open, nor monitors screeching. It happened in layers, as if his consciousness needed to re-emerge after a long winter. That morning, Anna was reading a passage from a book when she heard a muffled sound, like a stronger sigh coming from the bed. She looked quickly. Grant had turned his head, subtly, to the opposite side. She stood up slowly, approached, and whispered his name. Grant? Nothing. But then, seconds later, his eyelids fluttered. Once, twice, and then they opened, slow, confused, as if he didn't understand where he was. His eyes, an almost grayish blue, stared at the ceiling for a moment before wandering around the room until they found her. When their gazes met, Anna felt something hard to explain, as if that entire year of silence had been worth it for that single moment of recognition. She ran to call the doctor, and the room quickly filled with voices and hurried footsteps. Tests began, machines were reconfigured, and a flood of questions was unleashed. But Grant, even without speaking, never took his eyes off her. In the medical records, it was called a positive neurological response. In the team's reports, it was described as a rare progress, but to Anna, it was so much more than that. She knew, with an almost physical clarity, that he had recognized her, not by name nor by words, but by presence. For a whole year, she had been the only, constant, and now, in that confused, fragile look, she saw gratitude. She saw life. She saw the beginning of something she couldn't yet name, but that already lived inside her. In the days that followed, Grant underwent a battery of intense tests and evaluations. The medical team, astonished by the unlikely awakening, maintained a constant presence in the room, monitoring every blink, every attempt at movement. But it was with Anna that he relaxed. The moment she entered, his shoulders would drop slightly and the expression, once locked by confusion, would soften. Everyone knew recovery would be long. Grant couldn't speak, barely held up the weight of his own arm, and his memory was a blank field. He didn't remember the accident, didn't recall his own company, didn't even recognize the faces of family members who showed up sporadically more out of obligation than affection. But when he saw Anna, his eyes lit up, as if that stranger, who in truth was everything but a stranger, was the only thing that made sense amid the chaos. Anna began joining the physical therapy sessions at Grant's request. He didn't speak, but his eyes asked, and she understood. She held his hand as he tried to move his fingers, encouraging his small advances with smiles that seemed to light up the room. It was like learning to live all over again. He sweated, got frustrated, sometimes cried in anger when his body wouldn't cooperate. But he never gave up, and neither did she. In one session, when he managed to raise his arm to chest height, Grant looked at Anna with tears in his eyes. She said nothing. She simply rested her forehead against his for a second, as if to say, "I'm here," without words. Amid machines and rehabilitation, something delicate and real was born. A bond that had existed before he opened his eyes, but that now took shape, tone, and intention. Recovery progressed slowly but steadily. Grant could now sit with support, babble a few words, even manage a smile, albeit timid, albeit hesitant. The hospital began adapting his routine to his new phase, and his suite stopped feeling like a sterile capsule and became a more lively environment. Anna brought small plants, stuck motivational notes on the walls, and even discreetly colored one of the window panes with colored markers. "You were amazing today," one read. Grant read them in silence, his eyes still fragile but attentive. His family's presence was almost non-existent. His father, a distant magnate, came only once, and spent more time on the phone than with his son. His mother, bound by social obligations, preferred to send expensive flowers and empty messages. And Nathan, his half-brother, showed up in carefully controlled visits, always overly polished, always smiling with his lips, never with his eyes. It was during one of Nathan's visits that Anna began to feel something was off. He always arrived unannounced, asked generic questions about the treatment, but had a strange way of looking at Grant, as if he observed not a brother in recovery, but a problem about to resurface. In one visit, Anna noticed that as soon as she left the room, Nathan would lean in too close to the bed, whisper something inaudible into Grant's ear, then leave with the same rehearsed calm. A growing unease stirred inside her, something instinctive, like entering a place that seems normal, but your whole body warns there's danger. Anna wasn't one to suspect people easily, but her time caring for vulnerable patients had taught her to read details, and with Nathan everything seemed carefully false. That's when Anna began to investigate, not officially, not as someone with permission, but as someone who needed to understand what her instincts were shouting. During breaks, she accessed the hospital's old reports, combed through data about the accident, and gently questioned nurses and doctors who had been there when Grant was admitted. Piece by piece, clues began to emerge. The initial report spoke of mechanical failure, but the car's inspection documents, attached to the record by a third-party technician, mentioned irregular cuts in the brakes, something never further examined. Worse, that report had been redone 2 days later, erasing the first version. Anna's stomach churned. She wasn't an engineer or a detective, but something was very wrong. And the more she read, the more convinced she became that Grant's accident wasn't mere chance. One late afternoon, head spinning with doubts and heart racing, Anna decided to take a risk. She waited until the room emptied, pulled a chair next to Grant and whispered, "I think someone did this to you." He still had no memory of the accident, but something in his expression shifted, as if a crack had opened. Anna told him about the swapped reports, Nathan's odd behavior, the family's uncomfortable absence. Grant didn't respond. He just stared into space for a few seconds, then, in a still, hoarse voice, said, "My brother, he always wanted to be me." It was the first time he touched on the past with clarity, and it was there, in that stifling, silent room, that they both understood. The truth was near, and it could be more cruel than they ever imagined. From that conversation onward, a new energy took hold of Grant's recovery. He no longer fought only against amnesia or his body's limits. Now he had a purpose pulsing in every attempt to sit up, in every syllable he forced out. Anna noticed. He was trying to remember, trying to connect the dots, recover lost fragments of his life. Memory returned in disconnected flashes, a heated meeting, an unanswered message, Nathan's face twisted by anger. One night, he woke with a start, panting, and said simply, "The car, it was there." That was enough for Anna to confirm what she'd feared. Nathan was not just an absent brother, he was someone with motive, opportunity, and now, more and more, evidence against him. With Grant's permission, Anna reached out to one of his trusted friends, Julian, his former personal assistant, who had distanced himself since the accident. Julian was the opposite of what she expected. Dressed simply, speaking softly, looking you in the eye with disarming sincerity. When Anna shared her discoveries, he didn't seem surprised. He said that months before the accident, Grant had begun suspecting shady dealings in the company. Contracts approved without his signature, offshore accounts, deleted emails. Everything pointed to Nathan. Julian had tried to warn him, but Grant, wrapped in his own pride and exhaustion, was slow to listen. He was brilliant, but thought he could control everything alone, Julian said. Now the past returned as a dark puzzle. With Julian's help, Anna recovered the old reports and even tracked down the technician who had made the first brake inspection. He hesitated, but confirmed he'd been pressured to redo the document. By whom? He wouldn't say, but his eyes revealed what his mouth still feared to speak. With all the pieces in hand, Anna and Grant decided it was time to act. There was no more room for doubt or fear. They arranged a meeting with the hospital administration and handed over the documents, the printouts of the earlier reports, the technician's recorded testimony, everything. The atmosphere was tense. The director, a man in an impeccable suit and measured voice, hesitated before promising to forward the material to the authorities. But Anna knew it could be easily buried. That's when Grant, still struggling to walk, asked to speak. He rose from his chair with her help, looked around the room and said in a firm voice, "If this is buried, I swear by everything I have that you will never work in any hospital in this city again." The sentence, spoken with such physical fragility and moral strength, silenced the room. Everyone understood that Grant Carter was back and that he would no longer be silenced. The complaint was filed that same week. The case gained unexpected traction when the media uncovered the accident's details and the suspected attempted homicide. The police, pressured by public opinion, acted swiftly. They interrogated members of Grant's company administration, scoured contracts, and finally found the missing link. Messages exchanged between Nathan and a private mechanic about an urgent intervention on Grant's car days before the accident. A warrant was issued early the next morning. Nathan tried to flee but was arrested as he disembarked at a private airport. Anna received the news while cleaning Grant's room, as she did every day. When she told him, tears filled his eyes, not with anger, but with relief. For the first time in a long while, he could breathe without feeling something pulling him down. With Nathan behind bars, a new chapter began. Grant, now freed from the weight of the threat, threw himself even more into rehabilitation. His speech grew more fluid, his steps firmer, and his mind began to rebuild like fertile soil after a wildfire. Anna was by his side every day, but now something subtle had changed between them. The silences carried more meaning, the touches lingered longer, and their looks were no longer just caring. They were exploratory. Grant, with his full clarity returning, began to recall small gestures of hers. The way she fluffed his pillows, the scent of her perfume, the voice reading books he recognized only by the emotions they stirred. And one late afternoon, as the sun filtered through the room's window, he said, "You were my only truth." Anna didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to hearing declarations, much less of that kind, but she didn't shy away. She smiled, squeezed his hand, and said with the natural ease of someone who had lived it all together, "You were mine too." No poetry was needed, nor promises. There, in that raw, real connection, was something stronger than any idealized romance. It was affection built on silence, patience, a touch that cared without expecting anything in return. Grant, the man who once had everything, discovered that the most valuable thing was never in his bank account. And Anna, who had so often erased herself for others, realized she was finally seen in full. No need to explain, no need to hide her flaws. Their love was born that way, slow, deep, impossible to label, like a truth revealed when everything else falls apart. A few weeks later, Grant was discharged. The press swarmed the hospital entrance, cameras poised like weapons ready to fire. Questions, but he walked out in silence, head held high and steps steady, with Anna at his side. He gave no interviews, answered no reporters. He just squeezed her hand, as if to say that was all that mattered. In the mansion where he had once been surrounded by staff and impenetrable schedules, Grant now made a point of opening the door himself, brewing his own coffee and listening to the rain fall at leisure. The penthouse, once cold and immaculate, gained color from Anna's small touches. A pot of ferns on the balcony, an old crooked picture on the wall, books scattered across the living room. The place, once a symbol of control, was now home. Gradually, Grant resumed running the company, but without the same obsession as before. He delegated responsibilities, listened to ideas, and for the first time made a point of learning everyone's names, from the finance director to the guy who delivered his coffee. His partners found the change odd. Some even tried to persuade him he was being too soft, but he didn't back down. He was determined to build something different, more humane, more just. With Anna, he shared not only his routine, but also the silences that came on hard days. Sometimes he still woke up sweating, with vague memories of the accident or Nathan's tense face. In those moments, all it took was feeling her hand on his back to calm everything. The pain was still there, of course, but it no longer defined who he was. It was merely part of the journey that had brought him to this point. And Anna, with all her simplicity and quiet strength, was the proof that he had not only survived, he had been reborn. Tell me in the comments, do you believe connections like this can be born even in the most unlikely moments? And if this story touched you, share it with someone who deserves to hear it today. One afternoon, as the sky began to tint the horizon with orange hues, Grant called Anna up to the penthouse. She climbed without quite understanding why, thinking, maybe it was just another conversation about the day or some decoration detail he wanted to adjust. But when she arrived, she found the terrace transformed. Soft lights hung from the railing, small candles marked a path to an old wooden table set with 2 wine glasses. In the background, instrumental music played softly, and a gentle breeze carried the lavender scent from the hanging garden. Anna stopped at the door, unable to hide her smile. "What is all this, Grant?" she asked, her heart already racing. He stood there, more steady now, wearing a light blue shirt and that look of someone who already knew the answer before hearing the question. Grant held a small box in his hands, but the gesture wasn't rehearsed. It was shy, almost awkward, like a teenager mustering courage. "This is to thank you for staying when everyone else left, for giving me back a life I didn't even know I deserved." He stepped closer and opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring without extravagance, just like everything it now represented. "Anna Monroe, will you build the rest of your life with me?" She took a moment to respond, not out of doubt, but because tears slid down before she could speak. When she finally nodded yes, it was as if that entire year, all the silences, the pains, the struggles, fell into perfect place. There was no audience, no flashes, just the 2 of them, saying yes with their whole hearts. The wedding took place a few weeks later, in a garden surrounded by hand-planted flowers and details steeped in stories. There was no lavish ceremony nor long guest list, only people who had truly been part of the journey. Julian, some hospital colleagues, 2 long-term patients Anna had cared for, and even the technician who, way back, had had the courage to speak the truth. Everyone was there not for status, but out of affection. Anna walked down the aisle in a light dress tied at the shoulders with satin ribbons, and Grant waited with a smile full of truth, the kind of smile life teaches you to give after surviving almost everything. The rings were presented by a curly-haired girl Anna had met in the ER months before, and their kiss was sealed beneath a tree laden with white blossoms, whose leaves danced in the wind as if celebrating too. After the ceremony, dinner was served at communal tables, accompanied by laughter, long embraces, and shared memories. Grant insisted on giving a speech, even with his voice still a bit weak. "I used to be the most powerful man in this city," he said, looking at the few but precious faces before him. "But today, I am simply someone who is grateful to be alive, to have found meaning, and to have been loved even when I had nothing to offer." The ensuing silence was broken by genuine applause and tears. Anna, seated beside him, simply squeezed his hand. No words were needed. They were complete. not because they had conquered everything, but because they had survived together. And that, in that moment, was the most beautiful and truthful thing any love could be. The following months were full of adjustments, discoveries, and a new peace the two learned to cultivate carefully. Grant shifted to part-time work, dedicating mornings to the company and afternoons to things he once ignored: cooking classes, walks in the park, silent afternoons with Anna on the porch, watching the world go by unhurried. They made mistakes, sometimes argued, had good days and not so good days. But everything was different now. There was no rush, no pressure, no fear of losing what they had gained, because they knew, with the clarity of those who have seen life hang by a thread, that everything can change in a second. And so each gesture was lived more mindfully, each word chosen with greater care. They lived not in function of the past, but as a continuous thanksgiving for the now. Anna continued working at the hospital, but on a new, less exhausting shift. Not for him, but for herself. She learned to care for others without forgetting herself. And sometimes, when she entered silent rooms where patients seemed to sleep forever, she would approach slowly, hold their hands, and speak. She would tell stories, even without knowing if they could hear, because she believed more than ever that presence saves. Grant, for his part, got involved in social projects, founding an institution that supported accident victims and their families. Waking up is only half the battle. The rest is finding a reason to keep standing, he would say in interviews. And in every story he spoke of her, of Anna, not as a trophy or a muse, but as the person who stayed when no one else did, who believed before anyone else, and who, for that reason, deserved to be remembered in every line of the new life he chose to write. It was on a rainy afternoon, almost a year after the awakening, that Anna found herself standing at the door of the room where it all began. She was there to visit an old colleague, but as she passed the third-floor corridor, her steps slowed instinctively. She looked at room 318 and felt her heart tighten slightly. The room was now occupied by another patient, but for a second she almost heard the heart monitor's beeps, smelled the lavender diffuser, heard Grant's hoarse voice trying to form words. She smiled to herself. It wasn't nostalgia for the suffering, but a silent acknowledgement of everything that space represented. It was there that she learned the power of consistency, the value of staying even without guarantees, of loving without certainties, and of trusting the invisible signs life gives when everything seems lost. When she got home that day, she found Grant sitting on the living room floor, organizing old boxes. He looked up and laughed, showing her an old photo of the two of them, taken by Julian on one of their first days out of the hospital. "You looked so tired and so beautiful," he joked. Anna laughed too and sat beside him. They stayed there for hours, recalling details time tried to erase, reliving each small victory of that improbable year. When night fell, he pulled her close and said, almost in a whisper, "Life could have taken me away, but in the end, it brought me you." Anna simply rested her head on his shoulder. That was enough. No grand finale or eternal promise was needed. That now, with the scent of rain, the sound of laughter, and the quiet certainty that true love needs no fanfare, was enough. On the last page of the notebook Anna used during her shifts, the same one where she recorded the slightest signs that Grant was returning, there was a note written in small, firm letters. Sometimes it only takes one person believing for everything to change. She wrote that one random night while the hospital slept and the corridors exuded fatigue. She never imagined those words would become, in a way, a prophecy, because that's exactly what happened. While everyone else disbelieved, she stayed. And now, looking at that same notebook years later, while Grant slept on the couch with the cat in his lap and a book open on his chest, Anna felt peace. Not the empty peace of someone who runs from problems, but the peace of someone who faced everything, fell, got up and found, amid the chaos, an unlikely home. They never made magazine covers, nor became protagonists of a romantic movie. They didn't need that. They were just two survivors, he of an accident and a life full of masks, she of an exhausting routine and a long-held invisibility. But together they rebuilt themselves, and that reconstruction was made of affection, of listening, of time, of everything the modern world tries to rush, but that only blooms slowly. Today, if someone asks who Grant Carter is, few will still remember the feared, arrogant businessman. But those who truly know him now understand. He is the man who learned to love in the silence of a hospital room, who was reborn by the hands of a nurse, and who found meaning in what he once ignored. And if they ask who Anna Monroe is, just look at him, because where there is gratitude, there is memory, and where there is memory, there is love. And to not miss any of the next stories, activate the notification bell. Every week there's something new, intense and real coming your way.